Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're running down our top 10 cards from Unified Minds. This set is very powerful. It's obviously the biggest set we've ever had, so this is a very difficult list to try and narrow down, and I have done a little bit of cheatsy doodling here and there that you'll obviously notice, I'm sure. Trying to talk about as many cards as I can from the new set, because really trying to whittle it down to just 10 cards is pretty difficult, but I have been testing this format basically pre-NAIC. I've been practicing this, so I think I've got a good grasp over Unified Minds and what cards will be successful and which won't. Also, for this top 10 list, as we're looking at cards individually, I've tried to look at them in a vacuum as well and look at their future potential, not just what's here and now. So let's go down the top 10, starting with an item card, Great Potion. It seems very simple, and it is very simple, but simply strong. Heal 50 from your active Pokemon GX. This is comparable to an old Super Potion card that we used to have. It would heal 10 more damage, but you had to remove an energy card. So that sort of gives you a good scope of how powerful this actually is. And when we have such high hit points on the likes of some of these tag teams, Rashizard, MEWTWO&MEW, just doing one heal of a Great Potion can sometimes push you out of 2-hit KO range for a number of like non-GX attacking decks, which is very powerful. You can also try and combine this with things like Mixed Herb, which is often the case with Green's Rashizard, especially when you have Green to search these out for the right turns, and it just adds up to more and more healing, and you can end up using a tag team to simply run through the opponent's entire field. There have been a few other decks that I've been experimenting with Great Potion. Whimsicott most recently has been one of them. Even as like a 1 copy, this can be a really big tech card for Malamar decks. Malamar decks are running a lot of spell tags these days. They're sometimes running 4 copies if it's a pure psychic build, sometimes 3 if it's a GIRATINA&GARCHOMP tag team based build. Regardless, they try and put a bunch of damage on the board via distortion doors and via spell tags, and having a Great Potion when you promote your next attacker after they're going through their normal 2 shots with Giratina, you can undo some of that spell tag math they're trying to put on you, which is a really big deal for keeping regular GX Pokemon out of range. Things like a Whimsicott GX, things like the Cephalon, they could really benefit from adding in Great Potions. So I think this is a pretty big tech card for Malamar in particular, and I think that's why it deserves a place on this top 10. In at number 9, we have NAGANADEL GX. This is a very powerful card for drawing purposes. Obviously, we are aware of how powerful it is to draw cards. This is a very searchable Pokemon, searchable via Ultra Space, searchable via Mysterious Treasure, also Cherish Ball, of course. So we have many ways that we can get him into play in the first place, which is one of the biggest selling points of this card. That means he can slot straight into Blacephalon that was already playing Treasures and Ultra Spaces, and you can just easily slot one of these into the list, which is just very non-invasive. Just trying to find one space is not difficult, and you can end up getting a good number of cards in terms of value on some key turns, most notably on B-string turns where you need to try and dig. That can be huge, and towards late game you can try and dig towards custom catchers or your final welder or something like that to try and push the game. So Naga fits right in as at least a one-off in Blacephalon in my eyes. Obviously there are Persian based builds, which is a different avenue, but Blacephalon having the option for 1 NAGANADEL, I've even seen this playing 4 NAGANADEL GX and 4 Baby NAGANADEL, really trying to go heavy on this GX to get a bunch of draws going. I am more happy with the list that plays like 2 copies maximum, but I still think this card is insane for its ability alone. It does come with some powerful attacks. Venom Shot, you can B-string onto this guy, you can use triple acceleration energy, you can use welder and stuff, so you can get this going and do big snipes. 170 you can obviously deal with things like Dedenne, or finish off things that you've tried to 2-hit KO that have tried to retreat to the bench. So again, in Blacephalon you naturally play Beast Energy, so that's an option for you. And if you're going to go more heavily down this NAGANADEL based route, there's also the option of trying to play a NAGANADEL checkmate style build, and using this Dragon NAGANADEL as your draw engine throughout the entire game. You can play a plethora of Ultra Beasts, like non-GX Pokemon that you try and use to be awkward against the opponent and set up perfect math for you, to then go for a Stinger GX turn alongside things like Reset Stamp, and you can try and use the likes of Catwalk and Ultra Conversion to guarantee yourself a win condition after you've used that Stinger. So I think for his home in Blacephalon, he has made the top 10 list, but also he has this other option for a checkmate style deck to be built out of him, which is really awesome. Also notable is that in Japan it made big waves alongside a Porygon Z based build. Hasn't really translated over from my current testing so far, and I think that's just down to the amount of Mew that are currently being played. To answer Pikarom, that seems to be a big scary factor in the format. So maybe we'll see some Porygon Z Naga at Worlds, because it has been popular overseas, and that's another reason why you have to respect this card as a powerful option. In at number 8, we have Giant Hearth. This is the only stadium on the list, and it is a doozy. This card, like, when you compare this to Viridian Forest, you think it's like such an insane upgrade, and then you think that Viridian Forest is half the value every turn, and at the same time, your opponent is always able to take advantage of Viridian themselves. Giant Hearth is specific to you most of the time, unless they're a fire deck as well, so you're not giving your opponent any advantage other than the fact that they can simply discard cards to play around reset stamps. So it gives your opponent way less advantage than a Viridian Forest would, and it gives you double the advantage that a Viridian would for your own end. And that's, you know, like doubling up on Viridian Forest, which was already like a super duper played card, is unreal to think about. This stadium is on a stupid power level, to be quite honest, and it has amazing synergy, obviously, with Fire Crystal, with Welder, and with things like the Ninetales that you can see on screen. It can essentially be a combination piece alongside Ninetales to give your deck good gusting opportunities, which is incredible. It's obviously deck thinning for you and playing around Stamp at the same time. It just serves so many roles in your deck for thinning towards pieces. It's just absolutely insane. It is currently seeing play in Green Zard, usually as a 1-of, sometimes a 2-of, because Green Zard oftentimes has to play Power Plants. That's part of the reason why they're so strong. Mewtwo box-based decks, especially if they're Welder builds, of course, they will be playing a high Giant Hearth count, sometimes like 3 copies. And then there's opportunities for Blacephalon to go down this route as well. Typically, you'll see Blacephalon playing Ultra Space, and that's just really down to the lack of ball search that we have in the game right now. But there is potential for Blacephalon players to go down the Giant Hearth route and up their Welder count to 4 copies and try and get their energy acceleration that way. And there are some greens-based Blacephalon builds as well, which are indeed taking advantage of Giant Hearth, because, again, this card is just on a silly power level. The only reason why this isn't, like, higher up the list is because of the decks it's in. It's, you know, only, in air quotes, like 3 decks that can currently play it in format, whereas there are other things on the list that are, you know, giving birth to new archetypes, or just being even more flexible than Giant Hearth. So the card is absolutely insane. Probably the best stadium we will ever see, I think. It's actually genuinely that strong. I think it's easily the strongest stadium we've ever seen so far. Possibly Parallel City being like the only other one I can think to date that's as good. But like, this stadium is honestly so silly. In at number 7, we have GIRATINA&GARCHOMP GX. I do think that this will end up being a very powerful archetype of Malamar. Malamar in general being very strong. But the GIRATINA&GARCHOMP is, in a vacuum, just such a huge threat. Having that GG end, meaning that your opponent's bench is never safe if they're trying to use a non-GX in the active and build towards something on the bench. You can deny that quite easily with a GG end GX attack. You can try and combine this with things like Judge or Reset Stamp, especially if you are in the late game, to remove threats, even if it is something like in their active position, if they've just spent healing into something so you can't 1-hit KO it with a Calamitous Slash and it's a big tag team. You can remove all that energy commitment in one turn, try and put them to a low hand size, and really just let your Tina Chomp from then on run over the board. Calamitous Slash has great 1-hit KO potential if you have been using Distortion Doors and Spell Tags effectively in your early game, and that's what makes this an absolute monster, this deck. The Tina Chomp build of Tina Tags is essentially trying to sort of trundle through the opening turns of the game, trying to build to early Shadow Impacts with Giratina, slap some Spell Tags on while you're at it. Yes, you've probably taken a 2-shot on a tag team, and then suddenly a Spell Tag pops and you've won the game the next turn, just because Calamitous Slash closes the game instantly. Like, all you need is 2 Malamars in play and Viridian on board, and that is like bread and butter for Malamar. That's always happening. So Tina Chomp just closes games. It just shuts the door on tag team decks way quicker than any other Malamar build, and that's what makes it so potent. So I really do think this is like a game changer for Malamar. I think it's really insane. The only reason I wouldn't have this any lower down the list is because Malamar has to compete with itself, and Tina Chomp builds of Malamar are not the strongest in mirror match situations. I think the pure Psychic Tag Mally, and I think the Ultra Mally builds are stronger in mirror situations, and that's actually what's keeping it at bay. The fact that Malamar is so strong actually hurts the Giratina&Garchomp specifically because you're worse off in mirror match situations. You have to play Fighting Energy as your basic energy count. That means it's kind of difficult for you to juggle putting in an Ultra Necrozma yourself, and all of that leads to awkwardness for you. So Malamar being so strong in the format actually hurts this card in a vacuum and makes you sort of think twice about playing him. But if Mirror wasn't a concern, this would easily be the strongest Malamar archetype because Calamitous Slash just closes games so easily. Just a very, very strong card overall. In at number 6, we have ESPEON&DEOXYS GX. I've actually rated this higher than Tina Chomp now after playing with it, and that's because I believe it lives and is a star player in a stronger Malamar build than the Tina Chomp tag build. I think, again, in a world where Mirror isn't a thing, you would play Tina Chomp. But as soon as Mirror becomes a factor, ESPEON&DEOXYS just takes control. This is a Malamar deck that can beat other Malamar decks because Cross Division is a super flexible, very, very powerful GX attacking option. For just that 3 energy, you can do 10 counters on your opponent's board. This can easily finish off things like Dedenes after a few Distortion Doors and spell tags throughout the game. You can finish off things like Zera Auras or even tag teams that you've tried to hit into with Shadow Impact. And again, the flexibility that the Psychic spell tag deck now has with Distortion Door like most turns beyond turn 2, spell tag for like 2 or 3 turns in the game. Cross Division is easily just going to be focusing down that target that you definitely need to knock out, and that's absolutely insane. It can sometimes just sit in the active as well. It can tank, of course, when you need it to. 260 hit points is huge. You can try and build this up over a couple of turns. You can try and put 3 energies on him and try and hit into the active with a Giratina and force the opponent to have Gust, or if they're a deck that doesn't have Gust, you can get towards 6 energy on this Cross Division GX and do 20 damage counters on the opponent's board. That is dealing with so many threats. Sometimes that's mopping up 6 prizes in a turn if you've been like 2-shotting other things with Giratina. Sometimes that just gets rid of a big threat and then next attacker as well, or sets them up for a knockout. Usually this is your finisher. I will keep that in mind. But like sometimes it's just saying, you know, I'm gonna take a knockout, remove all these energies in play, whilst also like setting up a win condition for the following turn if you don't win on the spot with this card, which is absolutely amazing. Psychic Club isn't the best damage, but again, if you're needing to use him as your late game like tanking option, once you've gone through like a number of non-GX Giratinas throughout the game, which is usually part of the plan, you can then use a Psychic Club and then like switch back into like a Jirachi or something, use those last 3 Malamar recharges and get back into the active to Cross Division for game. That's normally how it goes down. So this card is very, very strong and is the main selling point in my eyes for Spell Tag Mally to actually be successful. He is the reason why he's so strong. A few of the cards that are being thrown into Spell Tag Mally these days, things like Esper, it has a very similar attacking option in Earkinesis. It adds even more sniping potential to the deck, which is amazing. It obviously can get shut down by Mew, but not many people actually can afford to put down Mew against Malamar decks because of Spell Tag and Distortion Door. So if they're putting down Mew, that's really good for you anyway, because that can be free prizes with spell tags. But that means that Esper gets away with murder, basically, because Earkinesis is very, very strong, and people can't afford to put Mew down against you, which is absolutely amazing. Another consideration card for ESPEON&DEOXYS sort of spell tag Mally decks is Mr. Mime, because Super Scoop Up is becoming a bit of a factor, because spell tag Mally is so strong. Tag team depths are trying to react and play Scoop Ups. Darkbox and Pikarom are starting to take note of how bad their matchup can be against this deck if it sets up. So they're trying to play Scoop Ups to try and balance that out and shut down the ESPEON&DEOXYS win condition or the Esper win con. So possibly adding in a Mr. Mime to your deck can help out against those pesky Scoop Ups. Because I really do think this is a top contender for Worlds. I still think it is. I remember in my top 10 list for Worlds, Deck-wise, I said Malamar was at number 2, and Psychic Malamar was my favorite build of those, and I still think that now. I still think it easily has the goods to win Worlds with the correct Psychic Mali spell tag list, because it is rinse and repeat with late game bombs like ESPEON&DEOXYS. Esper can easily close out games. Mimikyu is a huge threat. I really do think this archetype is very, very powerful. In at number 5, we have Weavile GX. Now, although I think Malamar is stronger currently, I think I have to give bonus points to Weavile for gluing an entire archetype together on his own back, whilst also having insane future potential. Every time you look at a new Dark card or a new card that has energy acceleration, you look straight to Weavile, because if you're able to manipulate that energy with Shadow Connection, it's just absolutely absurd. You're looking at things like Sabletar and Darkrai Umbreon. They've not made the top 10 list because they would be nothing without Weavile. They are completely based on the Shadow Connection helping them work. You would laugh at a Sabletar with that high energy attack cost without the help of Weavile. It would just never see the light of day. Darkrai and Umbreon, yes, Dark Moon's good, but to get to 6 energy, that's never happening unless you have this Weavile. So man, like, I've had to put Weavile on the list because he completely makes Dark Box an archetype on his own that can just get stronger and stronger if we get even more Dark type support. So it's a good nod to the other tag teams that we have in the set. They're good selling points. They're good reasons to play Dark because their own attacks are very strong. But Weavile's the engine that keeps it all rolling, and it's one of these cards that you just want to pick up because you get him in the binder. He's never going to get worse, and he could, like, have so many more potential options of other colorless or pure dark type attackers in the deck, because you can be toolboxy, you can move energies around and really make the most of it. So I do think Dark Box is a strong contender for Worlds, if a little bit on the inconsistent side. But if we got more Ball Search in like a future set, this deck just becomes insane. Because if this deck actually sets up, it's easily like the strongest in the game. It has the best win conditions. It's just the amount of times it sets up isn't strong enough right now, in my opinion, to be like the best deck in format. It's still among the best decks. So I would say, given more Ball Search or given potentially other attacking threats, this Weavile just becomes like the face of the format. He really will be dominant. So definitely a very powerful GX card. In number 4, we have Raichu&Alolan Raichu. This is just a very, very strong card. They've pushed Lightning to the absolute limit. When you thought Pikarom was at its peak, and then they just give you this card alongside Tag Switch, which also didn't make the top 10, but is like built for Pikarom, basically. It's just an absolute match made in heaven. Tandem Shock, doing 80 and 80 more if it becomes active. Obviously, you have free retreat from Zeraora in most situations, and you also paralyze. Paralysis is so strong in this format now that we have lost Guzma that this can be amazing for two-shotting things in a defensive situation, especially late game alongside things like Reset Stamp, which you're probably going to be playing because you have Volkner, so you can try and piece these things together. Just 3 energy is very achievable. You get it immediately off of a full blitz and just get it all onto Raichu, or you can get it with easy combos alongside like Tag Switch, Energy Switch, and all that other stuff throughout the game. So it's really easy and non-committal to get a Raichu rolling. 160 is already good output. Paralysis is obviously insane. As I said, defensively it's amazing. And just for setting up tag teams, it's absolutely what you're after here. But his one-hit KO potential is the thing that really blew me away. I didn't naturally see how easy it would be to get a Lightning Ride for full value, but it's honestly just expected to happen most games, I would say. Getting 5 energy on this guy is not difficult. He can cheat all the time with Tag Switch. He can cheat with Tapu Koko Prism. He can cheat with Thunder Mountain Prism. He's just a big cheater. That 5 energy is super easy to get once you've full blitzed once. And it's doing a base of 250 with that 5 energy commitment. And Electro Power obviously pushes this over the edge. So Choo Choo adds to Pikarom, making it the most damaging archetype in the format, I would say, for tag teams. Like, Mewtwo can hit 270 with a Dragonite, which, yes, is like the same energy commitment, but we have Electro Powers that can go even above that if we really need to, which, you know, you never do. it's way harder hitting than Reshizard is these days, and Dark Box also doesn't have that high of a damage cap outside of playing things like Zoro Ninja when their board is like 10 energy cards, which is just like a late game threat. So Raichu is just like the easiest mainstream one-hit KO tag team, I would say, right now. It's just absolutely insane. It also gets to switch to the bench as well, so you can put a non-GX in the active if you're playing Zapdos or if you're playing a Jirachi-based build, and that's just absolutely incredible for skewing prize races. The opponent oftentimes is going to have to go through things like a Pikarom, and then you're at 3 prizes, and then you do this big one-hit KO with Choo-Choo, especially if you combine it with things like Reset Stamp. Once again, I'll go back to that card because it's so strong. And if you put even if you just put a 2-prizer in the active instead, it just resets your Tandem Shock for the next turn, at the same time defending yourself from just losing the game if your opponent's already taken out a tag team. Whereas, Pikachu Zekrom is normally like your early game, and Choo-Choo is oftentimes the progression into the late game whenever you're against other tag team based decks. If you're still up against non-GX decks, you'll normally go for Tag Bolt because it's so insane at being able to jump over certain prizes and take more than one a turn, because that's normally how non-GXs will get their advantage against Pikarom. But against any tag team matchup, Choo-Choo is like easily the way to go. It's just a really insane option, and we just have way too many synergistic cards with it. If you want to lean into the Raichu even more in your Pikarom deck, you can even have things like Dormung's Necrozma, and you can try and chain Tandem Shock turn by turn as well. If you just have one Lightning on your Dawn Wings, you have Zero Aura in play, you can just keep chaining your one Raichu for this paralysis loop, which is absolutely nuts as well. So something to bear in mind. Raichu on here at number 4 just for being the new face of Pikarom. Like, we basically just play a 2-2 split of the Pikarom and the Choo-Choo now, because it's just that important of a card. And I initially tested with this guy as one copy, realized how many games I would lose by just not having him in the deck, and how often I was like searching for exactly this piece, and now it's like a guaranteed 2 of in Pikarom, which I believe is still the strongest deck in format currently. In at number 3, we have MEWTWO&MEW GX. Again, I've had to give brownie points to this card for the insane amount of potential this card has. The Perfection ability literally just screams potential. Every time a new GX card is printed, you gotta look and think, can MEWTWO&MEW abuse this card? What sort of acceleration can we use? What sort of synergy can we have alongside MEWTWO&MEW? It's as simple as that. Every new card that gets printed that has the word GX in it, we have to look straight to MEWTWO&MEW and see how it can be abused. Every evolution, every other tag team, it could all be used with MEWTWO&MEW, because that ability is just so ridiculous. 270 hit points with quote-unquote no retreat, thanks to no weakness, thanks to the Jirachi GX that we have in format, is already just a huge standpoint. Like, that's an upgrade of 30 hit points on a Pikarom if you just want to play one copy in Pikarom. There's no synergy there, but you're having 30 more hit points and like basically no downside outside of not being able to use Electro Power. That's a horrible example, and it's still a really good card in that deck. That's what's so insane. At the very least, you can be a hit point upgrade for a bunch of other GX Pokemon in the game, and at its very best, you're copying some of the tag teams. Some of the stage 2s that you can see on the screen now. Dragonite GX from the new set, Solgaleo, both Greninja GXs, the Latios that has a very awkward ability otherwise. These things can all be got around thanks to Mewtwo just copying them, throwing these cards into the bin, or simply benching them in the case of like some of the basics. You can suddenly just copy these, and you just have such insane flexibility throughout the game that you can really control what your opponent is able to do against you, which is absolutely nuts. Never forget that he also has an amazing GX attack himself, Miraculous Duo for 2 Psychic and a Colorless. You do 200 for that extra energy. You also get to fully heal your board, which again can be absolutely nuts in certain situations. Very difficult for a handful of decks to play around that, and also makes it a big threat against like non-GX 2-hit KO decks, because you're going to undo a lot of their work, which is absolutely insane, to be honest. The most popular build, I think, is Welder, and I think by far it's the strongest build, because you get to play 2 Reshizards, and that really helps you out against power plant-based builds, because you can at least be like close to a mirror match in that case if you're facing other Reshizard players. But there's also the popular like Japanese list, which was playing Mina and Altaria. I think the reason why Mina has been less strong in our format is that Altaria is less strong in the format when you don't play Choice Band. The pressure of 50 damage is just much less than 80 damage pressure return. So I do think that's why Altaria Mina won't translate over quite as easily, but Altaria could still see play in like the rainbow build of the Reshizard Welder Mewtwo because it's just so flexible and so powerful. But it's one of these cards that is never going to get worse, and it's always going to be insane. I really do think that it's just going to be one of these cards that can get even stronger every time a new set comes out. This is possibly the strongest GX of all time, arguably, just because, you know, it's so flexible and you can take advantage of basically anything in the game, as well as any other card can. And it's also like one of the most searchable cards in the game right now because you have treasure, so everything comes up trumps for Mewtwo and Mew. It's easily the strongest Pokemon that we have in the set, and it's only number 3 on this list because we have some of the best item cards available as well in this set. In at number 2, we have Reset Stamp. Reset Stamp is the return of hand disruption, and comeback mechanics is really the big thing here. We've been lacking comeback mechanics in the Pokemon TCG for way too long, and we finally have Reset Stamp in the form of an item card, no less. Forcing the opponent to shuffle their hand and draw cards equal to their remaining prizes is so strong. It's half of the N effect. Now, it does still pale in comparison to N, because N was still a consistency card. That made N a 4-of in like almost every deck in the format since its release. Reset Stamp is a very different card. It is not necessarily going to be like a 4-of in any deck. I think it's more so going to be 2 copies or 1 copy in decks that can use it, and really it makes that deck have a big selling point. You get to play Reset Stamp in the deck. In decks where it makes sense, it just really gives you an amazing way to come back into the game. There's a handful of decks that can take advantage of this card better than others, and that's mainly by searching it out at the right times, right? Because you want to use this towards the late game when the opponent has taken a number of prize cards. Therefore, Volkner, Green's Engines, decks that play Catwalk, decks that at least have Stellar Wish to try and access Reset Stamp in that mid to late game is going to be really important, and those decks will be the ones that make the best use of Reset Stamp and really do reap the rewards of disrupting the opponent. I really do think that's strong. There's also a handful of very filthy combos you can try and do alongside Reset Stamp. Things like try and combine it with Power Plants if you're against ability-based decks. Try and combine it with things like some powerful GX attacks. GG End, where you remove a big threat from the opponent's board all at once. Stinger, when you make them shuffle their prizes into their deck and set 3 back out. So you can Reset Stamp your opponent to 1 card, for example, and then go for a Stinger turn. Also Dark Moon GX, if you Reset Stamp someone and then make them unable to play any trainer cards, that's going to mean that, you know, their low hand size is even lower in theory because they're unable to play a handful of these cards. And when the only real competition for Reset Stamp is Judge, that means that you really do need to try and choose wisely of how you're going to disrupt the opponent's hand. I do think hand disruption is very, very important for the current format. There are some powerful greens builds out there. I think Stamp is one of the best answers to Reshizard, for example, stopping them just chain mixed herbs and chain custom catchers against you, and just even get them out of like welder combos with their next attacker, I think is insane. I think it's very good against a lot of other aggressive decks. Things like Blacephalon, it can get you back into the game. Things like Pikarom as well. Plenty of reasons why Reset Stamp is very strong in the format, and it can give you amazing comeback potential. I really do think this card is very important, and again, it's one of these that it's just going to see play. It's just supported by a good amount of cards right now, and as more item-based search cards come out in the format, Reset Stamp gets even better. If ever we get any recovery from discard pile, this card gets absolutely insane because you feel a lot less bad about having to pitch it in the early turns, and you could get it back as well. So I don't think we'll ever get anything like Puzzle of Time back in the format, but if we do get anything that can recover item cards, even if they're just shuffling them back into the deck, that would just be so huge for this card. So for future potential, it gets like an A-star as well. It's really insane. So yeah, this card is seeing play currently in a lot of decks. A lot of people are wanting to squeeze them in the builds if they can, just because it can be a game winner off its own back. And I think that'll be the case for its entire existence, basically. And in at number 1, we have the king of consistency, Cherish Ball. Cherish Ball is one of the only ball search cards we have in the game. And that's really sad to say, but this is why we're in a very, very heavy GX format. Essentially, Malamar is the only non-GX deck that can survive, in my eyes, in this rotation, because they have a number of Ball Search cards on their own. They have Com, and they have Treasure, and they have Giratina, which infinitely loops itself. So once you find one copy of a card, you can loop it entirely. Every other deck has to use Cherish Ball. Look at the top decks in the format right now. Pikarom will play at least 2 copies. Mewtwo plays 4 copies. Dark Box plays, like, again, minimum 2. And I would say Blacephalon plays a minimum of 2 copies of this card as well. And that's just because it's so vital. It's going to get you your main attackers. It's going to get you your engine in the case of Weavile. And in the case of Mewtwo&Mew, where you're going to fuel your discard pile with Pokemon, even if you're just Cherish Balling to then use the Dene to get rid of it, or use it with Giant Hearth or whatever. The Cherish Ball is really important to help deck thin and get your main attackers out at the same time. This card is just super flexible, and the main reason it's such an amazing thing to have in your deck is it can grab the Dene, and the Dene is an essential cog in every deck right now for getting set up. It's simply giving you an extra 5 or so outs in your deck. That's only if you're playing 4 Cherish Ball, 1 Den, 6 outs if you play 2, and etc., to not have a dead hand turn 1, and that's just vital. Having, like 15 outs turn 1 to not just brick instantly and draw pass is such a big deal. Cherish Ball lets you do that with very limited downside, because it can also just be flexible throughout the entire game. It's always insta-playable. It can just get you your attackers, and it's never going to be one of those cards that you hate to see in your hand. It's just always going to be strong. And again, it's one of those things where this card has no limits. It's currently a card that's being played, and I would say, just on the screen, these are 4 of the top 5 archetypes in the game right now, I would say, something like that. And it only gets stronger as more GXs come out in the format. We already know GXs are some of the most insane cards. It's even in Reshizard. I haven't even put that on the slide, but it's played in Reshizard as well, of course. It's just played in everything, and it will continue to be played in every GX deck. It's a huge reason why GX decks survive right now, is because we can actually find them, and it means that we don't have to play ugly cards like Pokemon Fan Club and whatnot, because that would really slow down the tempo of the entire game. Cherish Ball makes it all okay. So that's why it is placed at my number 1 slot as the best card from Unified Minds, because it's just going to see play for its entire existence. And if we see more decks like Mewtwo and more decks that are pure GX based, Cherish Ball is just going to be a 4-off copy quite easily, and you're just going to combine it with 2 Den for your consistency alongside supporters. It's as simple as that. It just provides way too much for you to ignore. That's going to be my top 10 then, guys. Let me know what cards you like from Unified Minds. Have I missed any of your top favourites? I'll hear it all down below. You can tell me why I'm foolish to not have had this card or that card on the list. I hope you enjoyed me sneaking in a few cards here and there as well, and appreciate that this is, the biggest set of all time, as I've already mentioned. So I did have to cut some corners here and there and mention a few things outside the list. But yeah, that's going to be it for today, guys. Hope you did enjoy. And Worlds is just around the corner. I've been doing a lot of streaming recently over on twitch.tv/Team OmniPoke. I actually just had a follow right here, which is really weird because I'm not streaming now, obviously. But I just had the sound effect in my ears, which is really weird. But yeah, I'm streaming Worlds testing as well. So keep your eye out on Twitch, and I'm going to be uploading my testing to YouTube as well. So I hope you're enjoying them so far. Only a few more days now until I start flying, and that's going to be amazing. I really can't wait for this Worlds. I've practiced a lot for it, and I'm really hoping I can do well. So, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.